I was disowned for choosing art over law, but now my family wants a cut of my success. Growing up, my family made one thing very clear. Success wasn't a choice. It was an expectation. And success, in their eyes, meant power, prestige, and money. It meant law degrees, medical school, high-rise offices with nameplates on the door. It meant expensive suits, handshakes with important people, and a life that fit neatly into the mold they had built for me before I was even old enough to understand what I wanted. But I never fit that mold. No matter how much they pushed, no matter how many times they reminded me of my duty to the family name, my heart was never in it. I didn't dream of courtrooms or closing deals. I dreamed in color, in brushstrokes and sketches, in canvases filled with stories I couldn't put into words. When I told them I was going to be an artist, the disappointment in their eyes burned hotter than any insult they could have thrown at me. My father, who had spent years boasting about my promising future in law, looked at me like I was a stranger. My mother, who had once shown off my grades at every family gathering, didn't even try to argue. She just shook her head, muttered something about how I was wasting my life, and walked away. My older brother, already deep into his own corporate career, laughed outright. "You're serious?" he had said, shaking his head. "Good luck starving." And just like that, I was done. Done trying to please people who saw me as nothing more than a reflection of their expectations. Done breaking myself into pieces to fit into a puzzle I had no interest in completing. I packed my things, walked out of that house, and never looked back. What followed were the hardest years of my life. The struggle wasn't just financial. It was the weight of knowing that my own family had written me off, dismissed me like I was nothing. I bounced between cheap apartments and part-time jobs, scraping together whatever I could to afford supplies, living on instant noodles and rejection letters. There were nights I lay awake, staring at my ceiling, wondering if they were right, if I was wasting my life, if I should have just swallowed my dreams and followed the path they had set for me. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of one thing. They had abandoned me. They had turned their backs the second I chose myself over them. And if they couldn't stand beside me at my lowest, they sure as hell didn't deserve to be there when I made it. And I did make it. Slowly, painfully, but surely. One sale turned into 10. A small gallery agreed to showcase my work. Then another. Commissions came in, little by little, until one day I didn't have to work a side job anymore. My name started circulating in the right circles. And before I even realized it, I had gone from struggling to survive to thriving in a world where my art spoke louder than their judgment ever could. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of my pieces, a painting I had poured my entire soul into, sold for more money than I had ever seen in my life. Suddenly, I wasn't just making a living, I was successful. My work was in demand, my name was in magazines. My bank account had more zeros than I ever thought possible. And just like that, the same family that had thrown me away came crawling back. It started small. A message from my brother, casual, as if we had spoken just last week instead of years ago. "Hey, heard you're doing well. Proud of you, man." I didn't respond. Then my mother called, her voice dripping with forced warmth. "I miss you," she said, as if she hadn't ignored my existence for years. "We should have dinner, catch up." I let the call go to voicemail. But the final straw came when my father, the same man who had once told me I was throwing away my future, showed up at one of my gallery openings, smiling like he had been there from the start. "I always knew you had potential," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "The family is so proud of you." Proud. Proud? Where was that pride when I was struggling to afford food? Where was it when I was alone, working in the dark, wondering if I had made a mistake? They hadn't believed in me when I needed them most. And now that I had built something for myself, they wanted to rewrite history, pretend they had never doubted me, never abandoned me. But I remembered. I remembered every word, every look, every moment of their disapproval. And I wasn't about to let them forget. They thought they could walk back into my life like nothing had happened. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they could waltz back into my life as if years of silence and rejection had never happened, as if their absence during my hardest moments could be erased with a few empty words and forced smiles. But what they didn't realize, what they had never understood, was that I remembered everything. Every insult, every condescending sigh. Every moment they had looked at me like I was a failure for choosing my own path instead of the one they had paved for me. And now, standing at my own gallery opening, surrounded by people who had supported me, believed in me when my own family had turned their backs, I watched as my father schmoozed with the guests, as if he had been here from the beginning. He shook hands, nodded approvingly at my work, even chuckled at one point, saying, "Oh, I always knew my child was talented." My mother hovered by the hors d'oeuvres table, pretending to admire a painting she probably didn't even understand, her smile plastered on like she was trying to fit into a world she had once mocked. And my brother? He was already circling the wealthier patrons, making easy conversation like he belonged. The audacity of it all was almost impressive. I should have been furious. I should have walked up to them, thrown them out, humiliated them in the way they had humiliated me when I was nothing. But I didn't. Instead, I watched, observed, because this wasn't just about anger. No, this was something colder, sharper. This was about making sure they knew that whatever version of me they had once controlled no longer existed. Quite a turnout, a voice said beside me. I turned to see my mentor Ava, a woman who had believed in my work before I had, before the critics, before the buyers, before the money. She was elegant in that effortless way, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd with quiet amusement. She was one of the few people who knew the truth about my family, about how I had clawed my way up from nothing with no support, no safety net. You could say that, I muttered, taking a sip of my champagne. Ava followed my gaze, landing on my parents, and let out a soft chuckle. Let me guess. They weren't there when you were selling sketches on the street? Not even a phone call, I murmured, swirling the champagne in my glass. She sighed, shaking her head. They always come back when there's money. And that was the truth of it, wasn't it? They hadn't come because they missed me. They hadn't come because they had realized their mistake. They had come because they had seen the articles, the sales figures, the headlines. Because suddenly, I was a name worth knowing. And names worth knowing came with money. I set my glass down. I think it's time I say hello. Ava smirked. Oh, I have to see this. I approached my father first, my steps slow, measured. He was mid-conversation with a couple of investors, charming them the way he had always charmed people who mattered to him. I knew that look well, the face he reserved for people he wanted something from. Ah, and here's the artist, he announced grandly, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This is my child. Brilliant, really. Always knew they had something special. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. That's interesting, I said, my voice light, easy. Because I remember you saying art was a hobby. Something only fools pursued. The investors blinked, glancing at my father, who let out an awkward chuckle. Now, he said, patting my shoulder a little too hard. Let's not dwell on the past. I stepped back, making sure his hand fell away. Oh, but the past is important, I said, my voice smooth, controlled. Because the past is the reason I'm here, the reason I made it. I let the silence hang for a second, just long enough to watch his smile falter. Without my family's help, of course. My mother, who had wandered closer, stiffened at that. Darling, don't be dramatic, she said, her voice dipping into that carefully measured tone she always used when she wanted to manipulate a conversation. You know, we always believed in you. I turned to her, arching a brow. Really? Is that why you told me I'd regret it? That I was throwing my future away? That I'd come crawling back begging to be part of the family again? I took a step forward, lowering my voice just enough to make her uncomfortable. Funny. Because I don't see myself crawling. Her face paled. My father cleared his throat, clearly trying to salvage the moment. Listen, we may have been a little harsh, but that's what parents do. We push our children to be the best. I let out a soft laugh. No, you push them to be what you want them to be. And when they don't fit the mold, you cut them loose. I tilted my head. And now that I'm successful, you think you can just walk back in like nothing happened? The investors had quietly slipped away by now, sensing the tension thickening between us. But I wasn't done yet. I'm sure you've been keeping up with things, I continued, my voice calm, almost conversational. The sales, the commissions, the money, that's why you're here, right? My mother bristled. We're here because we love you. Love. I held her gaze. Love? I repeated, as if testing the word, rolling it around like a foreign object. You mean the kind of love that disappeared the second I chose my own path? The kind that only seems to exist now that my name is worth something? My father sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. All right. What do you want then? Do you want an apology? He said it like it was an inconvenience, a small price to pay to smooth things over. Because fine. I'm sorry. There. We can move on now. I smiled. Oh, I don't want anything from you. That's the beauty of all this. I gestured around the gallery, at the people here to celebrate me, at the success that I had built without them. I already have everything I need. My mother blinked rapidly like she was trying to come up with another angle, another way to manipulate the situation. My father's jaw clenched. My brother, who had been standing off to the side, arms crossed, finally spoke. You're really going to shut us out? He asked, his voice laced with irritation. After everything? I turned to him, my smile never wavering. You mean after everything I did? After the years I spent struggling while you all pretended I didn't exist? I let out a small sigh, shaking my head. No, I'm not shutting you out. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice just enough. I'm leaving you behind. The words hit harder than anything else I had said. My mother looked like she wanted to cry. My father's face was red with barely concealed anger. My brother just looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Good. I stepped back, giving them one last look, one last moment to take it all in. Enjoy the rest of the night, I said lightly, turning on my heel and walking away. I didn't look back. Because they weren't worth looking back for. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence behind me told me everything I needed to know. My parents had come expecting a reunion, expecting me to welcome them with open arms, to pretend the years of abandonment had never happened. They had assumed that money, success, had somehow erased the damage, that now that I had made it, I would be eager to be part of the family again. But they had underestimated me, again. I had no interest in rewriting history. As I moved through the gallery, nodding at familiar faces, shaking hands with collectors and critics, I felt their eyes on me. My father's barely contained frustration, my mother's wounded pride, my brother's disbelief that I, the one they had written off, was now someone they needed. They weren't used to being powerless. They had spent their entire lives holding authority over me, dictating my choices, making sure I knew my place. Now they were the ones on the outside, and they hated it. Ava caught up with me near the bar, her lips twitching in amusement. That was satisfying to watch. I smirked, picking up a glass of champagne. You were listening? Oh, I didn't have to, she said, leaning against the counter. Your father looked like he was about to combust. Your mother looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. And your brother? She took a sip of her drink. He looked pissed. I let out a small chuckle. Yeah, he doesn't like not being in control. Ava tilted her head. And you? I blinked at her. What about me? She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. How do you feel? Now that they're here? Now that they want something from you? I hesitated. That was the real question, wasn't it? How did I feel? I had spent so many years carrying around resentment, using it as fuel to push forward, to prove them wrong. Now, faced with their sudden interest in my life, I expected to feel triumphant, victorious. But the truth was, I just felt tired. I sighed, swirling the champagne in my glass. I thought I'd enjoy this more, I admitted. I thought seeing them like this, needing me, would be the best revenge. And it's not? I shook my head. I don't know. It just feels pathetic. They're not here because they care. They're here because they see my success as something they can use. And that's just... I exhaled sharply. It's exhausting. Ava nodded, setting her glass down. That's because you don't need revenge, she said simply. You've already won. I frowned, but before I could respond, a movement in the corner of the room caught my attention. My brother. He was walking toward me, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Ava noticed him too. Want me to stick around? She asked. I shook my head. I've got this. She gave me a small pat on the back before disappearing into the crowd, and within seconds, my brother was standing in front of me. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his expensive suit, tilting his head slightly as he studied me. You really meant all that, didn't you? He said. I took a slow sip of my drink. Every word. He let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. You know, I always thought you'd come crawling back. That eventually, you'd realize you needed the family. I arched a brow. Funny. I thought the same thing about you. His jaw twitched, his hands curling into fists in his pockets. You're making a mistake. I sighed, already tired of this conversation. If you're about to give me some speech about how family is everything, and how I should just let the past go, save it. I don't owe any of you anything. He scoffed. You really think that? That you don't owe your own family? I set my glass down on the table, my patience wearing thin. I think I paid my debt a long time ago. I gave up everything to try and make you all proud. I bent over backward trying to fit into a world I never wanted to be part of. And when I finally chose myself, you cut me off. I leaned forward slightly. So, don't stand here and tell me I owe you, because if we're talking about debts, you owe me. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then finally, he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You're really never coming back, are you? I met his gaze, my voice steady. No, I'm not. He swallowed, his throat bobbing. Mom's taking this hard, you know. She should have thought about that before she disowned me, I said flatly. He gave me a long look before finally sighing. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? I smirked. I learned from the best. For a second, something flickered in his expression, something almost like regret. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the same cold detachment he had always worn like armor. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. And just like that, it was over. By the end of the night, my parents were gone. They hadn't said goodbye, hadn't made another attempt to reach me. They had left quietly, slipping out like ghosts, their presence lingering in the air like a bad memory. And I felt nothing. No sadness. No guilt. Just relief. Ava found me as I was locking up, handing me another glass of champagne. So, she said, how do you feel now? I thought about it for a moment. Then slowly, I smiled. Lighter. She grinned, raising her glass. To leaving the past behind. I clinked my glass against hers. To finally being free. And as I took a sip, I realized something. I had spent my whole life trying to prove them wrong. trying to show them that I was worth something, that I could succeed without their approval. But I didn't need to prove anything anymore, because I knew my worth, and that was more valuable than any family name. The days after the gallery opening felt strange, quieter, lighter, like I had just stepped out of a storm and into the sun. There was no more waiting for the other shoe to drop, no more bracing myself for another phone call, another guilt trip, another desperate attempt from my parents to reclaim their influence over me. They had tried, they had failed, and now they were gone. And finally, I was truly and completely free. It was a strange feeling, really. I had spent years carrying the weight of their expectations, twisting myself into knots trying to be what they wanted, and then years more fighting against the damage they had left behind. I had built my success with the fire of my anger, the bitterness of my rejection. And now, standing in the silence they had left behind, I realized something. I didn't need that anger anymore. I had already won. I was sitting in my studio when I got the final confirmation that my parents had given up. An email from my father. Short, director, cold. We understand your position. You've made your choice. So have we. That was it. No apology, no last-ditch attempt to negotiate their way back into my life. Just a final, quiet closing of the door they had slammed shut on me years ago. I read it twice, waiting for the familiar pang of resentment to hit me, waiting for the ache of loss to settle in. But there was nothing. Just relief. I deleted the email. Then, for good measure, I blocked both my parents' numbers, along with my brother's. Not out of anger, not out of spite, just out of necessity. Because I knew how this worked. I knew that if I left even the smallest door open, they would find a way to slither back in, and I was done with that. I closed my laptop and turned to the blank canvas waiting in front of me. And for the first time in years, I picked up my brush, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I wanted to. Months passed. Then a year. My success didn't fade. It grew. My name became more than just a fleeting headline. It became a legacy. My work was displayed in galleries across the world. My commissions booked months in advance. I had everything I had ever dreamed of. Stability, recognition, respect, and most importantly, peace. My parents never reached out again. Maybe they had finally accepted that I was gone. Or maybe they had just realized I wasn't the kind of success they could profit from. Either way, I didn't care. They had made their choice a long time ago. And so had I. I built a life for myself. A real life. One that wasn't shaped by their disappointment or their demands. I surrounded myself with people who chose me. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. People who saw me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. And as I stood in my newest gallery, surrounded by my people, friends, supporters, fellow artists, I felt something I never thought I'd experience. Contentment. Because I had spent years thinking that success would be my revenge, that proving them wrong would be the thing that finally set me free. But in the end, it wasn't about them at all. It was about me.